Desde que crecí, primero desde Atlas, pero nosotros empezamos a y una vez comenzamos, exactamente acá de matarme a una foto de sí,
sí, sí estás. Sí, ya es. Hola. Sí, esa fue una duda, ¿no? Porque por eso se escucha reverberante.
Sí, se escuchaba lo que se
Number one, yeah. Really wait. Yeah, this is your microphone. You. Oh, okay. Perfect. Good.
Let's put it in the number one slide. I think it's
this one.
Yeah. Well, you can go like that. You can go like that.
Okay.
But the faster is, I think it's faster to go like that. That's it.
Okay.
Brain and mind. That's my title, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or is it? No, it's in
yeah, that's the number one.
No, but this is the one. The title.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Ok, muy buenas tardes, tengan todos ustedes. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Me voy a permitir dar una breve introducción en inglés debido a nuestro ponente y sobre todo pues agradecer de primera entrada la oportunidad que nos ha prestado el venir el día de hoy aquí al doctor Paxinos y sobre todo por la invitación de la doctora Limei Xiang. Over the years, mainly in laboratories focusing on neuroscience and neural models, one becomes familiar with classic works, practically mandatory for reading and consultation. Also, one learns that having done this work must have meant great effort and dedication, but above all, a lot of creativity. Therefore, when Dr. Limei told us that there was a possibility that Dr. George Paxinos could come here to give a lecture, many of us were very excited. For the Department of Physiology, it is an honor to have Dr. Paxinos, who for many of us is an excellent reference in the study of neuroscience. On behalf of Dra. Julieta Garduño, head of the Department of Physiology, I would like to welcome to the School of Medicine of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Please make yourself home. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Limei Xiang, a professor in our department, to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Muy buenas tardes aquí en el auditorio y también los colegas y alumnos que nos acompañan vía YouTube. Profesor Paxinos particularmente está haciendo mucho esfuerzo para que sea más cosas en español para que los estudiantes enteran completo los mensajes. Entonces voy a introducir. I'm going to make the introduction in Spanish because you sent me. So yeah. So Dr. Paxino es profesor ciencia, which is que es un nombramiento de la Universidad de Australia en Sydney, ¿no? El doctor Paxinos estudió psicología en la Universidad de California en Berkeley y en la Universidad de McGill y en la Universidad de Yale. Antes de tomar un puesto como profesor en la Universidad de New South Wales en Sydney, en Australia. Ahora es investigador principal, senior, del Consejo de Salud y Ciencia Médica de Australia y el profesor ciencia de la Universidad de South Wales. El doctor Paxinos identificó hasta ahora 94 regiones desconocidas antes de él en el cerebro de ratas y de humanos y ha publicado 57 libros sobre el cerebro y la médula espinal de humanos y animales experimentales. La mayoría de los científicos que trabaja, incluyendo nosotros, estaba yo hablando con la doctora Pertugo, todos tenemos en nuestro laboratorio el Paxinos, ¿no? Lo decimos que, a ver, encuentren el Paxinos y discutimos, ¿no? Pues ahora tenemos el doctor Paxinos como ser humano aquí, ¿sí? Entonces, pues el doctor Paxinos como neurocientífico es uno de los más citados en el mundo. Su primer libro, El cerebro de rata, o sea, The Rat Brain, ¿no? En coordenadas estereotáxicas es el trabajo más citado en neurociencias. Sus atlas de cerebro humano recibió el premio de excelencia en publicación científica médica por la Asociación Americana de Publicaciones y el premio al libro ilustrado de la Asociación Médica Británica. El doctor Paxinos sirvió como presidente de la Sociedad Australiana de Neurociencias y del Congreso Mundial de Neurociencias de IBRO, del International Brain Research Organization, en 2007. No quería también contar nuestra historia, so I can say this in English. No, when we went to that meeting, I had my student Mauricio Vito as a second year medical student. We traveled to Melbourne and Dr. Paxinos hosted a very elegant dinner. So we went there for the dinner. We were very shy, but we had a colleague, which is more brave, got every one of us to see Dr. Paxinos. We took a picture, and the picture is still in my lab in front of the bibliotome. So we use that. We always, when we do good anatomical work, we always think of Dr. Paxinos. So George, thank you very much to come and for give this lecture.
Thank you, Limei, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a nice place, and I hope I'll come again. I really would like to. Thank you, Mario, for translating some of the things that I will say in Español. If I may start with the comment by Mark Twain. I always get embarrassed when they introduce me. Could you say what that is? Embarrassed. Me apena que me introducen. They never say enough. Okay, I know you understand my English because otherwise you wouldn't have giggled now. Es el cerebro del tamaño correcto. I'm an atlas maker, but that's not always a nice thing. Ricciamente, oops. Now I better go back to my presentation. There we go. Recientemente conocí a una dama que ha usado el atlas desde hace 40 años. Cuando me introduje, ella dijo, George Paxinos, pensé que estabas muerto. I have a little claim to fame. Yo estreché la mano que estrechó, la mano que estrechó, la mano que estrechó, la mano de Wilhelm Wundt, the founder of psychology in Leipzig, 1879. So anybody who shakes my hand goes back to The rat brain we studied firstly, and we did the stereotaxic atlas, and somebody kindly brought the second edition of 1986 here with them, and having attained some a result with the rat, we thought of trying the human. But before, the reason, by the way, that we were able to get a more accurate atlas in the rat than previously was because we used chemoarchitecture, that is the distribution of chemicals in the brain, not the traditional Nissl and myelin stains. For the first time in an atlas, chemoarchitecture was used. As you can see here, in the case of the monkey, rhesus monkey brain, you can see the amygdala here. It's very nicely already delineated. You do not need to be an anatomist. I was not an anatomist. I was a psychologist. But when I saw the stain, I said, I will be able to do an atlas which is more accurate than the atlas is then, because I had that stain. You don't need to be a great neuroanatomist, not even a neuroanatomist, because you can see this thing here is different from that thing there. You cannot make a mistake. The stain does not allow you to draw a different border. And at that time, it was said in neuroscience by Floyd Bloom, the gain in the brain is mainly in the stain. And somebody sent me this. I don't always stain the mouse brain, but when I do, I prefer acetylcholinesterase. And different stains provide different windows to the brain. Now, the avian brain stem in different colors that you can see here, different stains, different windows. And we use different stains in adjacent sections and then integrate the information. Different chemicals will tell you different things. And then you integrate and you get a more accurate atlas. And you might say, Las Aves, haven't you heard? Everybody says that something bad about the bird brain. Well, las aves tienen cerebros de primera clase, solo no tienen buenas lesiones públicas. And we were able to do with Luis Puelles from Murcia an ontology based on development. And you can see here that is because it's difficult to find what belongs to what in the brain. You just can't say that, well, I'll just name it that way. No, if you say something is ventral, well, that means it's been subjected to ventralizing influences in development. And you expect things from that. You cannot. Unlike literature, look at Shakespeare. Una rosa bajo cualquier otro nombre huele igual del dulce. No, not in anatomy. No, that doesn't work. And we did an ontology here that you can see and what belongs to what. And also we dispensed with the avian names that were used for the thalamus, the brainstem. So if a nucleus is the auditory nucleus of the thalamus in the rat and it's called medial geniculate, then that must be also called in the bird and not nucleus ovoidalis as it was previously called. So we dispensed with the avian names on the principle that it's the dog that wags its tail and not the tail, the dog. We thought that we will be well received in the field and prepared ourselves for this nice reception. And we commissioned a symphony that has elements of France, where the idea of constructing an atlas was conceived under the direction of Nicole Douarin, and the execution of this atlas in España under the direction of Luis Puelles. But we forgot that what Anne Graybiel said, that neuroscientists would prefer to cambiar, to change toothbrushes rather than nomenclature. And there are still some people who don't smile when they see us because we dispensed with their earlier nomenclature, which is, of course, consistent with their own work earlier. And now their work is not so easily accessible because of us. But you might say, of course, birds, I mean, birds, right, that's fine, but who cares really what the situation is, the human? What about the human brain? Well, I thought before trying the human brain, I should try the brain of another primate with opposing thumb, right? So that I know what to expect in a human brain, because the human brain, you get 8 hours post-mortem or more, and things change for the worse. And you stay, it is not as good. But if you get a primate brain, you get it right away. And once you know what to expect, then you see it. So I wrote to the Taronga Park Zoo in Sydney for the opportunity to do a post-mortem on a chimpanzee brain once a chimpanzee died. Here I'm showing you an orangutan because I didn't have a chimpanzee pose for me. And you can see the similarity externally. Internally, the brain is the same. The zoo replied, "We will be happy to give you a brain, but we have not had a death of a chimpanzee in the zoo for 10 years. 2 months after receiving my letter, 3 chimpanzees died. Luckily, they didn't suspect me. And I studied the brain of one of them, and that led us into constructing this human brain STEM atlas that you can see here. It was published 2 years ago, and we used the classical Nissl-Stein, but look how difficult it is to identify things in Nissl. I mean, you can see the ambiguous nucleus if you know it's there, right? You can see it's there, ambiguous nucleus. But if you look at acetylcholinesterase, look at the ambiguous nucleus. It's obvious. You cannot make a mistake. It doesn't let you make a mistake. But then, of course, there were some things that were not noticed before. And I noticed this nucleus here, which I named the endorestiform nucleus, in this part here. And to identify a nucleus, you need to meet certain criteria. And the worst thing, of course, is to name something that isn't a nucleus, but it's part of something else, or to rediscover a nucleus. That would be terrible, right? So I was looking at this nucleus, endorestiform, for 30 years, and I couldn't figure out what to do. But then in my mind, there was also this other image here, where after anterolateral chordotomies of the human in the 1960s, they were performed to relieve pain. And one of my colleagues had the tissue and we studied it. You find that there are terminals or pre-terminals from degeneration of spinal cord connections to this part of the brain. So when I realized that, which was in my brain together for 20, 30 years, but that recently, it just brought them together, that this is another criterion. That is, this nucleus receives terminals or preterminals from the spinal cord, and that is different from the other regions around it, and I have the right to name it, to call it a nucleus and name it. And there you go. It's the diagram with the endorestiform nucleus. Now, you might say, oh, that's all good, but, really, people do work on the cortex, the subcortex, who cares? Well, the cortex, there is a good work done, but by one Economo that you can see here. But his atlas, unfortunately, is not used in human research, though it has been used in primate, non-human primate research. Look at this marmoset. It's the size of a small rat, and yet it has a primate brain. It has the same areas as our brain. The greatest surprise I got in science was this. We did an atlas of the marmoset brain. Look at it. If you look at the human cortical map, it's the same. Now, the human, you can find some divisions in some of these areas, which may or may not happen in the marmoset or the rhesus monkey, but there are very few. You're talking about maybe 3 areas where we didn't subdivide the temporal lobe because we felt that maybe it's there, maybe it isn't, who knows. But in the basic plan, it is homologous, unlike the rat. The rat cortex is not homologous. It's principally heterologous, except for the principal somatosensory and motor areas where you have homologies. The rest of the cortex of the rat is not homologous. The subcortex is largely homologous, maybe 90%, but even the bird, maybe the bird brain might be 75, 80% homologous to the human brain. We've tried to do some work on the cortex in the last edition of the atlas we produced. Jorgen Ma is the principal author here, but we're not satisfied yet that we've done a good work on the human cortex. And here you have competing works done by people of BrainNetOme in China using connectivity MRI data to figure out areas. And I will just show you the correspondences between the rhesus monkey cortex and the human cortex. Look at them. All the areas that you find in one, look at the yellow, for example, are found in the other, and conversely. And when we did an atlas with the help of Petridis and Pandya, we identified in the rhesus monkey area 45A and 45B. Now, somebody pointed out to us, complained that is, that these areas are Broca's areas. When did you last have a conversation with a monkey? And we replied that if the right side of the brain of the human has areas 45A and 45B, yet it doesn't speak, then we have the right to do the same in the monkey and call them such if cytoarchitectonically, myeloarchitectonically, connectionally, they are homologous. They behave the same. Now, yeah, so we found no difference in areas in the monkey and in the human using the same criteria. Now, of course, MRI is really where a lot of work is done. And I noticed one of your colleagues here is doing magnetic stimulation, and some of you perhaps do MRI. And you can see here the rat brain we studied with MRI, and we did an atlas of it. In the MRI, you can see the connections, and you can preserve the native space of the skull, the stereotaxic considerations. And we've done the same thing, just is now printed, the book for the human brain stem using MRI data. And you can see the direction of connections. So it's of some help, but of course, it does not have the resolution of histology. But now I'm going to show you something else. This is the brain of one of us. This is the brain of my colleague, Mark Shearer, and he is fine. Don't worry about him. I mean, he's lucky, you know, to get his brain like this. Before a few years ago, he would have been mortal. And you can see some of the connections more readily. The stereotaxic space is, of course, the native stereotaxic space. And here he is, live and well in the middle. His brain is what you're seeing. And here, oh, well, it didn't show the connections. Because we've done also connectional map to do what the others are doing as well with the connectome, looking at the areas of the cortex that fall out on the basis of each voxel's connections with every other voxel. But now, on the more abstract aspects of my talk, ¿por qué la psicología perdió su alma? And under this title, a similar title, Brain and Mind, who is the puppet and who is the puppeteer? These questions have significance. La pregunta tiene implicaciones sociales, legales, religiosas. Si la mente controla el cerebro, entonces existe el libre albedrío y sus corolarios, la dignidad y la responsabilidad. Eres el rey en tu reino del tamaño de un calavera. Eres el arquitecto de tu destino. Si por el contrario el cerebro controla la mente, se sigue una conclusión incendiaria. No puede haber libre albedrío, ni alabanza, ni castigo retributivo, ni purgatorio. Of course, if there's no purgatory, what good news. I mean, I would think they would thank me for that if I managed to convince anybody. Imagine all your life to think that you're going to go to hell because you thought of illicit love. Well, it'll be a nice thing to be relieved of the burden that, you know, don't worry. So you have no responsibility whatsoever. Now, the brain was thought very nicely. Well, firstly, of course, it had some rough time with the Egyptians, and I'll go into that, but it has been thought of very highly by some people. Look, for example, what Aesop says. La zorra entró en la casa de un actor y rebuscando en todo sacó una máscara, una hermosa imitación de una cabeza humana. Puso su pata sobre él y dijo, qué hermosa cabeza. Sin embargo, no tiene ningún valor porque carece por completo de cerebro. And who would have thought of Woody Allen as being an optimist? Nobody. And yet, even he, when he speaks about the brain, has something nice to say. Now, the ancient Egyptians, por millenniums, they heedlessly, without thinking, discarded the brain. They threw away the brain. Pero milenios de faraones fueron descerebrados a su vida después de la muerte. The first to discover the connection between the brain and the soul or behavior was Alcmaeon of Croton. And the philosophers before Sócrates reemplazaron el mito con la realidad, desterrando a los dioses la magia. And Alcmaeon was in Crotone, in Magna Grecia, and from there the information seems to have passed on to Kos, where lived the greatest doctor of antiquity, vista asombrosamente moderna del cerebro. Los hombres deben saber que del cerebro y solo del cerebro surgen nuestros placeres, alegrías, risas y bromas, así como nuestras penas, dolores y lágrimas. Aristotle had made a mistake, and he thought el cerebro está ahí para enfriar la sangre, air conditioning. La grandiosa de un profesor es calculada con el tiempo que tarda en detenerse el progreso en su campo. And Aristotle's followers made sure that progress would not occur for 1,000 and more years. And but there was someone else. It was Galen of Pergamon. En los puntos de vista encefalocéntrico Galen y cardiocéntrico Aristóteles se enfrentaron durante 1,300 años hasta después del amanecer de la ciencia moderna. And you see here in Shakespeare, dime dónde se cría la fantasía, el amor. O en el corazón o en la cabeza. And you would think, la cabeza, you agree? Guess what? Nobody out there thinks it's la cabeza. Look, I went to 300 cartas de San Valentín, cada una con al menos un corazón rojo, ninguna con el cerebro. And it forced me to write, escribo a letter to the newspaper. Corazón, I love you, te amo, con el fondo de mi cerebro. And a lady journalist from Melbourne called me. Do you insist that the heart has nothing to do with love? I said, if in a heart transplant, I take your heart, I am not going to fall in love with your husband. She said, what a pity, qué triste. He's such a lovely man. And the brain is as beautiful as the heart anytime. But here, después de la batalla para localizar el asiento del alma, la psicología pierde su alma en la década de 1930. I was giving this talk to the Australian Neuropsychological Society, and before going to the talk, I went to the cafeteria where some of them were staying, and I went around. Do you have a soul? And the answer was always, pardon me. They couldn't believe I was asking the question, but eventually one girl said, I had a soul until I started my PhD. And Heb is saying, la mente es la integración de la actividad del cerebro. No hay fantasma en la máquina. Okay. And for scientific considerations, if the soul is where emotion, motivation reside, where mental activity occurs, where sensations are perceived, memories are stored, reasoning takes place, and decisions are made, love is manufactured, memories are stored, there's no need to hypothesize its existence. There is already an organ that does that work. So, poor humans, pobre humanos, how do we call them? What are we then? We have a soul, it seems. Psychology, at least, doesn't need it to understand behavior and change it. Not necessary, surplus to requirements. But do we have at least free will? And Skinner here tells that really their behavior is the outcome of only two factors, none other. The genetic endowment, over which we have no choice, and the environmental influences on that, where our mother was smoking, our grandmother was drug addict, that epigenetically influenced what genes will be expressed in us, what culture we're born in, what religion was forced on us, baptized, whatever were done to us. So he says that they have no choice over either of them, and therefore there can be, theoretically, no freedom, no free will. And in this respect, el entorno, the environment, esculpe el carácter tan como el artista desconocido Fidias esculpió a Apolo en mármol de Parián en esta estatua del templo de Zeus en Olimpia. Como Praxiteles sculpted Hermes. So the environment shapes our behavior. We are genes sculpted by the environment. On the domain of love, it is possibly easier to see that there is no freedom, at least in some people, and they are not few, but a lot, who report that they can't get rid of the love. There's even a song by Maria Dolores Predera. Who knows of Maria Dolores Predera? Anybody? Good. I feel good. Make me feel good. I have all her discs from the 1970s. And there is a song that says, devuélveme mi amor para matarlo. Return me my love so I can kill it. Wait a minute. If you're free, you don't need to beg him to return your love. Just do it yourself. So you can see that, and you might say, of course, that, well, is this all theoretical stuff? No, it's not. Because of the people who are abandoned, half or more than half interfere with the person who abandoned them at their home, at work, on the internet. Some of them will hit her. Some of them will kill her. Some of them will commit suicide. If only they listen to neuroscientists, they would find that much as they cannot discard the love that torments them, she cannot make herself love them. So the brain decides in neurological darkness on the basis of the molding that it has received up to today. Today, the decision will be made on the basis of any genetic predispositions you've had and the environmental influences that shape those connections, neurotransmitters, etc., in the brain. Tomorrow, if today your experience is something different, you might, under the same circumstances, make a different decision. So we are slaves, esclavos of como do dice, yesterday, ayer. And we are slaves of ayer, slaves, no freedom whatsoever. Pero psicólogos are smart, very clever, inteligente. They discovered that today is tomorrow's yesterday. A big discovery. And now they take the patient and they talk to them. And of course, a priest can do that. A friend can do that. Today can shape the brain in some different way, and the decision tomorrow might be more appropriate for what a person wants and cannot get rid of. And Alzheimer's disease will pay an unwelcome visit to most of us at the end of life. It will disrupt the internal structure of our neurons. It will be living evidence the mind is the product of the brain and has no influence on it. And this, of course, idea that we have no freedom is consistent with what Christ said on the cross, that forgive them for what they don't know, what they are doing. If they knew what we know, then they would be with us, not against us. CLC, now, I said some nice things about the brain, but now comes the difficult part. I think the brain is not in the Goldilocks zone. Have you heard of Goldilocks? You know, she went there and found 3 breakfasts for 3 bears and tried one, oh, too hot. The other, too cold. The other one, just right. The Goldilocks zone. The earth is in the Goldilocks zone around the sun, not too close to burn, not too far to be frozen. The brain, my view, is not in the Goldilocks zone. Si el cerebro fuera más pequeño, menos inteligente e incapaz de hablar de lo que es, no habría sido capaz de producir la ciencia y la tecnología que hoy amenazan la existencia. Si el cerebro fuera más grande de lo que es, los humanos podrían haber sido capaces de comprender el problema e incluso rectificarlo. The brain is just not the right size as a conclusion to, as an answer to the question in my talk. And here you have the situation of the human hubris. We are operating under a triple delusion. And you know, the worst delusion is to compare yourself to the gods. And we consider ourselves in the image of the deity, of Dios. Well, the ancients had very dim view. I told my granddaughter, 8 years of age, of the story of Sisyphus. Have you heard of the story of Sisyphus, anybody? Some people have. Well, this king of Corinth was condemned to push a rock up the hill, only for it to fall down again, and then push it up again. I told her, because he was egotistical, narcissistic, and insulting. And she said, like Trump. Yeah. So gods didn't have kindness for this. And now we have a problem with our brain, the issue of the environment. And I'll alert to the problem. Consider, I asked her, again, referring to her, tell me something that you will do today that will not damage the planet. She said, running. I said, that's good, but if you run, you will wear down your shoes sooner, and the companies will have to make more shoes for you, pollute the planet more. She said, running without shoes. I said, that's good, but if you run, you build up an appetite, and you will need to eat more meat and other things, and have to have more cows, and more trucks will come to the city to bring you food. Then sitting on a chair. I said, that's very good, but the chair, you have to cut a tree to make the chair, then lying on the ground naked. And so there is a problem with the environment, and there's a problem with population. And the book, which if anyone of you want to read, I will leave it with Lee May, and she promised that she will lend it after she reads it. And if anybody wants to translate on Espanol, let me know. I did this because of this. In my view, we're faced with triple delusion, and that I mentioned before, that we have a soul, free will, and we are made in the image of Dios. And in fact, if we understood, as some others have said, like E.O. Wilson, that we're puzzled, we stand before nature. We don't know why we're here. We have a brain that contains leftovers of the reptilian period. We have Paleolithic emotions. We have medieval institutions. You have the Catholic Church that tells you that, HIV, AIDS is devilish, it's bad, but not as bad as prophylactics. The result of this is, of course, contagion, but also overpopulation. That you can't mention the word overpopulation without having religious people tell you, oh no, don't interfere with the will of God and that stuff. And that is really resulting, because twice as many people on the planet, other things being equal, twice the environmental impact. We have medieval institutions, and we have a technology that threatens ourselves and other species. And armed with the truth of what we actually are, may we set our stern to the dawn and make wings of our oars. And again, that is why I wrote this novel. I was depressed by environmental action. I tried many things and I failed in everything. And I thought, if I wrote a novel, I might be able to work upstream of behavior, at attitude, so that you wouldn't have to stop someone from cutting a tree. He wouldn't want to cut the tree if only he was taken through the arc of the hero of the book and was sensitized to environmental issues. And here, of course, it's full of neuroscience, because that is handy to actually penetrate the character. You can even find some neuroscientists here. Who knows of Jose de Olmos? Jose de Olmos, anybody has heard of the amygdala guy who did the best maps of the amygdala? No, okay. Well, he was from Argentina, Cordoba, and he's also one of the heroes of my novel, and he's died now. And he could not complete his work in Cordoba, and I said to him, but he says, I've got it all in my head, and I was editing a book, and his chapter was 1 year late, and I had to have that chapter. And we're both going to be present at the neuroscience meeting in Phoenix, in Arizona. And I said to him, look, you and I will stay back, you'll dictate, I'll type. And so we did. but we were both sleep deprived and jet lagged. And I was sitting down typing. Jose was walking around the table, dictating. And I said to him, Jose, sit down. He said, no, because if I sit down, I will fall asleep. And then I hear a sudden noise. It was Jose falling asleep, standing up. So I have some friends in here. And if I may read to you, I'm proud of this. The Spanish language has such nice expression. And I've used them, it's in English, of course, but when appropriate. And there was this young boy who was pushed by his mentor to give a talk and to a group. And he was frightened. He says, I don't know anything. You know everything, Alberto, the little boy, Jose says. And Alberto replies, más sabe el diablo por viejo que por diablo. And then I found another one where a fellow was suspected of really causing the trouble. And somebody said, el diablo gobierna el mundo. Dios hace lo que puede. I thought it was suitable for me at that point. And if I may for a moment proudly tell you at least one of the expressions in Espanol that I constructed. In tango, you know, a woman a man can grab her and be strong and pull her. She doesn't always like to be pulled very tight, the tanguero embrace, right? So my card, or my heroes, right, wrote a card for the tangueros. Que te abracen solo aquellos a los que tú quieres abrazar. And the other, who knows tango here? The tango, you have ochos adelante and ochos atrás. And they are both the same. Doesn't matter, right? But my expression is que los ochos siempre sean para adelante. Adelante sounds better, but it's exactly the same. So I went and wrote this novel about the environment that broke a record in the time it took me to complete, 21 years. And it uses psychological principles. And 21 years, you might say, well, look, I was sitting there just before submitting it, and a friend came along and she said, how's the book going? Well, I said, 21 years, not finished yet. She said, my cousin's novel was published posthumously. I said, you are giving me hope. And then I went to a publisher, and they says, what does it have? What is it about? I said, it's about identical twins raised apart. It is about human cloning. It asks the question, what would someone with the genetic endowment of Christ do today? Would he join Wall Street or street protests? It's an environmental novel. And he said, and on what shelf would I place it? And until that time, I was convinced of what Woody Allen was saying. If you are a bisexual, you double your chances for a rendezvous on a Saturday night. And I'll just go quickly through some of the images of the book, because it takes place, this is Jerusalem, this is Roma, where some scenes are set in St. Peter's Basilica. This was, of course, Pantheon, Antiguo Café Greco, and now is the river divided is the title, and there's the divided river. And my partner was at the back there. Rio Salomon is Rio Negro, different acidity, different temperature, different color, different catchment areas. And there are two brothers, identical twins, raised apart, that are destined to meet for one moment only, to be lost again forever in the Amazon, on the opposite sides of the environmental debate. And just go to there's a medical school where comes a revolution or an attempt to a takeover of the school by the students who demanded, amongst other things, reduction in reproduction. And I thank here Cicina Ferreira, who allowed me to use our conversations in this book. Cicina was the first girlfriend of Che Guevara, who unfortunately died. Cicina died this year. And which I wish you all that your brain shrinks less than what is expected for your age. And thank you for listening to me.
Preguntas, comentarios sobre, muchas gracias, Josh. Algunas preguntas que quieren hacer.
Yes, hello, nice. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your nice talk.
I want to know what those twin studies has shown us about this aspect that you say that genes by an environment are the only two key tools to model our brain.
The only ones.
So what those twin studies have shown us?
Twin studies? Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. The twins, they have the environments of the more similar, including not the reactions they get out of people. They would be similar because they look alike to the extent that we treat people from the way they look, right? They would also have similar experiences there. But they are, the studies show, of course, that they are more convergent on intelligence, on many things. If one twin is preference for the same sex, the probability that the other one will also have preference for the same sex is high, 50%, which is 50 times higher than expected by random, but not 100% as we would expect that if the genes were the only determinant of that behavior. But the divergence that often happens, I have the explanation. So just consider 2 twins, 2 years old. They were running to press the button of the lift, and one of them managed with some trickery to press it first. The other one, suicide. This is the only solution. It's down on the ground, hitting its head. It takes only some little things early in life, and Freud was very correct in pointing out early in life, like an infant's behavior, to set you on this path, down the mountain, this slope, or the opposite slope. But once you commence in that path, then it's difficult to change. Thank you, by the way, for staying after hours.
Thank you very much. I have a question regarding the early part of your talk, regarding the acetylcholinesterase staining. I was wondering, what if the nucleus does not receive cholinergic projections? Are there any such movies?
Oh, yes, that this acetylcholinesterase is a poor proxy for acetylcholine. It's catabolizing other neurotransmitters, other things. But back in 1977, when I was exposed to it, and I fell in love with the way it makes the brain look. At that time, it was a proxy, approximation. They say, well, maybe, but yeah, more often than not, it's not acetylcholine neurons that contain it. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. My question also goes to Jean-Pascal's question about your, I wish that you can make some more comment how you, being a psychologist and starting to be in love with brain, that is also because your brain made you your mind, and how you started to do this huge life project that's making so many atlas. You can tell us some stories.
Well, it was coincidence. I saw this. There's some things that you're lucky, and I was also lucky in that in Sydney there was someone who was a real anatomist, Watson, and he taught me neuroanatomy. But in science, at least in Australia, you get funding for what you have succeeded in something, and because the atlas was successful, then I could get funding there. I was actually more interested in the environment. I applied for the environmental grants, and I didn't get anything. And I got more money to do brain atlases. And I thought, well, I'll do environmental thing as a hobby, a side thing, which I did until I really started writing the novel, because I just wasn't successful with anything. But yeah, in life, some decisions are consequential. That is, something happens to you, something happens, and that actually has consequences. That was the case for me with maths. Of course, I had equal affinity to psychology and to this and to the environment, except that I consider that all else we do will become irrelevant if we lose the environmental battle. And I cannot see any chance of succeeding in constructing a sustainable society, only marginally better chance than if we were simply chimpanzees. I see emotionally, motivationally, similar to them, and I wouldn't expect them to behave any differently. Certainly, they don't have the weapons, but they have they will use anything at hand to tear each other apart for the harem. But on the other hand, there's nothing more important to do than try to help constructing a sustainable society. In this, I find as a significant impediment the religions. They are obsessed with sex. Religions, obsessed with sex.
The last thing I would like to ask you, if you can give some message to the young students. You know, this today's world with when you started neuroscience some 50 or 60 years ago is very different. So do you have, if you were born today, what would you do and how you would face the difficulties that we have today, the young students for the young students?
Yeah, well, I mean, the things that I learned that might be of some worth consideration by young scientists is that you gain more by being generous in your collaborations. So look after your collaborations. We've been collaborating for 45 years, and this year we're publishing the Atlas of the Spinal Cord. So we like working with each other, and if you manage to establish good relations, you'll get more out of them than insisting that, oh no, my share of this is greater than yours and demand things. So look after your collaborators. The most selfish thing to do is being generous. If you can imagine, you'll come back to you better. And also look after your friends. I found that even when I was working long hours, that friendships would always assist in making life better. And amongst the things that delay dementia, the top three are exercise, which is walking, running, swimming, rowing, cycling, or friendships, and of course diet, the top three things. So friends will help you delay the onset of your dementia. everyone by the time you're 100, virtually everyone will have dementia. And try to postpone it. You die from something else.
Well, now we have a lot of new techniques that have been studied in the brain to map different therapeutic regions with new tools, for example, mapping RNA. How does that have a large review about the brain map?
Yeah, well, that's right. I had a glance at the Allen Institute RNA images there, and some of them informed what we're doing. I wished I had time to do more of that. But yeah, I mean, atlases might seem impossible, but actually they have their own motivation, inducing motivation once you start. Yeah, there would be room for someone to do that, to inform additional atlases with all the other areas, especially the cortical areas that are usually difficult to define. Areas, cortical layers, and they're so nicely shown with tomato or whatever they call that thing now. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. I have one last question. This is from our one of our professors at our department, Dr. Diana Gizer. First, I want to congratulate you for your excellent presentation, which reminded me of the studies on child abuse and the neuroanatomical changes and brain connections, as well as the sense organs that are a consequence of child abuse and neglect, and that subsequently determine all the cognitive and behavioral factors and response and functioning in adults. And that precisely made me think about your question about free will, because many times from a psychological point of view, even biological drugs, we could think that we are determined by those antecedents and those changes that occur even from prenatal stages during the formation of the brain.
So well put. And if I may say that it was implied in that question, is that those who abuse, even child abuse, is the worst thing you can think of, and yet even very often, more often than not, that is more likely to have been abused themselves. So yeah, that the environment will shape your behavior for better or for worse, even for dementias. Native populations in Australia contract dementia 11 years earlier than the Australian population. And this is the same in the US, Canada, and New Zealand. So that you really look at this, and society, of course, is getting more polarized, the rich richer and the poor poorer. So that has to be looked at. And I do not know why we don't have another revolution. We had one some years ago.
Thank you. ¿Alguien más? ¿Para una última pregunta? ¿No? Okay. Dr. Paxinos, thank you very much for such an interesting talk. You have delighted many of us with your presentation. Once again, we are deeply grateful to you for having accepted to give your lecture in our School of Medicine. Finally, on behalf of the entire physiology department, we would like to present you a certificate of your lecture and a small gift. Thank you.
Let me know.
Thank you so much. Para nuestros asistentes, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros y les deseamos una excelente tarde.